virtual camp of Company K, 67th New York Infantry, also known as the 1st Long Island Volunteers. And, well, normally we would be offering up our educational program in person, live at your school. However, as you can see, we've had to adapt to the times just like all the rest of you. And here we have a virtual classroom where we're going to teach you something about the American Civil War. Okay, first an introduction. My real name is Max Kenny. However, when I'm in uniform, I am Lieutenant William Kent of Company K of the 67th New York Volunteers. We are Civil War living historians, also known as Civil War reenactors. And in our spare time, we reenact the American Civil War. We perform at battle reenactments, such as Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. However, we also engage in a lot of other activities. We also conduct monthly meetings and drills at the Grange, which is a park in Sayville, Long Island. We also hold living history encampments at the Grange and at various historical societies throughout Long Island, where we teach the general public. We march in parades, both here on Long Island and at other historical locations, such as Gettysburg. We perform ceremonies at cemeteries and at special historical events. And most important, we also perform at a lot of schools. We conduct a lot of educational programs. Our primary mission is to educate and to preserve Civil War history, as stated in our New York State Charter. And we believe that the best way to do this is to act the part and to teach both students and the general public alike. We're all amateur historians. We study the Civil War extensively through books and a lot of other primary materials. In this first video, we'll start at the beginning with the formation and enlistment of the original 67th New York 1st Long Island Volunteers. The American Civil War was the bloodiest war in American history. After 11 southern states seceded from the Union after the election of President Lincoln in 1860, what followed was 4 years of fighting, resulting in an estimated 750,000 U.S. soldiers dead. If you add up all the wartime deaths from American war, starting with the Revolution up until today, it still wouldn't totally amount killed during the U.S. Civil War. And if you add in the civilian casualties, the estimates actually rise up to about 1 million. Now, to give you an idea of just how bad things were then, if the Civil War happened now, you would need to kill off 10 million Americans, which would be the equivalent of wiping out every man, woman, and child in all 5 boroughs of New York City, plus Long Island. That should give you an idea of just how bad those times were. No one escaped the impact of the Civil War. And remember, this was particularly tragic because this was Americans fighting Americans. You had fathers fighting sons, you had brothers fighting brothers, you had families torn apart, and the southern U.S. was devastated to the point where it took nearly a century for it to recover. Not to mention that it fundamentally changed America on every level, from abolishing slavery into forging a common national identity. Yet at the start of the war, much like at the start of most wars in U.S. history, many people thought it would be over just like this. Well, they were sorely mistaken. Few people at the time foresaw just how long and just how bloody this war was going to be. The American Civil War began with the Confederate attack on Federal forces at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor on April 12, 1861. President Abraham Lincoln then called for 75,000 volunteers for a 3-month enlistment to crush the rebellion. However, the U.S. government soon realized that they would not be nearly enough, and later President Lincoln then called for 300,000 men to serve for 3-year enlistments. Now, as students, at this point, you have to understand what it was like to be living in the 1860s. See, unlike today, where we're used to the fact of having a large standing military, back in the 1860s, Americans were not thrilled on the idea of having a large national army. In fact, it was kept very small. And this was due to the American Revolution, which was a backlash against having a large British military presence. both the North and the South had to rely upon the state governments in order to raise these volunteer regiments. Eventually, 2 million men served in uniform in the North, and 1 million men served in the South. And since New York State was the most populous state in the Union, we sent the most soldiers. Some of the first to heed Lincoln's call were men living in Brooklyn and also up near Rochester, upstate New York, and they fell in to enlist and create the 67th New York Volunteers. The 67th New York had a very famous sponsor. In the 19th century, the most famous religious figure in all of America was Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, who preached at Plymouth Church in Brooklyn Heights, which is still standing today. The Reverend was a passionate abolitionist, and his church served as a stop on the Underground Railroad for runaway slaves. Reverend Beecher's sister was Harriet Beecher Stowe, a celebrity in her own right. She was the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, an anti-slavery novel that became the best-selling novel of the 19th century. Released a decade before the war, her book was so influential in fueling abolitionism that when she met President Lincoln, he allegedly remarked, "So you wrote the book that started this great war." Now, if you're wondering why we have a second name, the 1st Long Island Volunteers, that's because back in 1860, Brooklyn was a separate city. It was not part of Greater New York City, and Brooklyn was considered to be part of Long Island, hence 1st Long Island Volunteers. The basic building block of the U.S. Army was the regiment, which consisted of 1,000 men on paper, and those 1,000 men were divided into 10 companies of 100 men each, and the companies were named by letters from A through K. The 67th New York was mustered into service on June 24th, 1861, and they were sent to makeshift camps such as South Brothers Island and existing bases such as Fort Hamilton and Brooklyn for their training. After which, they were sent down to Washington City, as Washington, D.C. was called at the time, and from there, they were sent to the front. The 67th New York 1st Long Island Volunteers served faithfully and honorably throughout its whole 3-year enlistment, participating in many of the major battles, including Gettysburg. Many of the veterans of the 67th New York, after mustering out, wanted to see this to the end, so they re-enlisted with the 65th New York Infantry, and they fought until the very end of the war in 1865. Now, as part of this virtual classroom, we like to repeat, as we do in person, that our job here isn't really just to throw you out a lot of facts and figures. That's something that your teacher should be doing. We think it's a lot more interesting to show you what it was like to be alive at that time and what was life like as a Civil War soldier. And we're going to talk about all the basics, such as what we wore, what we ate, what was life like in camp, what happened if we got sick, and of course how we fought. Now at this point we can take questions, and we'll be using Google Meets, and you can fire away and we'll answer the best we can.